Hey, welcome to Staying Strong for Marriages, a YouTube channel dedicated to helping people work through marriage separation or divorce. Hey, today I'm going to be looking at a few studies that I found. It says about one half of first marriages of young adults today are likely to end in divorce. For second marriages, the projected level is closer to 60%. It also says about 3/4 of young divorced persons are likely to eventually remarry. It says nearly all Americans eventually marry. About 95% of the population above 45 years of age in the United States in 1980 had married. But the situation has been changing markedly among younger Americans. So referring to table 1, it's much easier to see here. This is men, this is women by age brackets. This is percentage of adults ever married. So you can see in 1980, about 31%. If you look at the older people, 74-year-olds, 65 to 74-year-olds, about 95% of people were getting married. This is among men, among women, almost exactly identical. So you see here again, women are marrying earlier. About 50% of women at that time, between 20 and 24, were married, whereas men during that time period, less, 31%. Now here's the interesting thing, percentage of married adults ever divorced. So you can see this is really interesting. Among the older generation, only about 16% of them got divorced, which was pretty amazing frequently. Now this third column is interesting, percentage of divorced adults ever remarried. And you can see that, people are going to get remarried. Among the oldest people, almost 85% would end up getting remarried eventually at some point in their life. So it says a tripling during the last 2 decades in the proportion of children born out of wedlock is one of the most extreme happenings associated with a sharp decline in marriage. The proportion of children born to unmarried mothers rose from 5% in 1960 to 11% in 1970 to 18% in 1980. And we'll look a little bit more here in a bit in another article about what that kind of means for children. But this says the number of unmarried couples has been increasing at an extremely rapid rate. So people are choosing not to get married. About 15% per year during the last decade. And it says a reasonable prognosis is that the number of cohabitating unmarried couples may come close to doubling during the 1980s. This next article is just interesting because you can kind of see statistically where children end up going, whether to mom or to dad. In 1981, so living with two parents, about 76% of children were living with two parents, and about 20% were living with one parent. Of that 20%, about 18 out of 20, that's 90% of these kids would end up going to live with mom, 10% going to live with dad. So if we jump forward from this study looking at 1980 to 2003, jump forward 23 years into the future in Western Washington University, 2003 article looking at pre-marriage sex, pre-marriage cohabitation, and the risk of subsequent marital dissolution among women. So what they're basically trying to do in this study is try to see, can you predict divorce rates or separations based on the number of pre-marriage sexual partners for women or the number of pre-marriage cohabitation situations that a woman has been in. In 1954, nearly 1/4 experienced their first instance of sexual intercourse within marriage. For women born between 65 and 69, that number dropped to only about 10% having their first sex within context of marriage. One of the most clearly defining correlates of cohabitation is an increased risk of marital dissolution. I find that neither premarital intercourse nor premarital cohabitation, if limited to a woman's husband, is linked to the subsequent risk of marital disruption. However, intimate premarital relationships with other men are associated with substantial increases in the likelihood of divorce. One of the most robust predictors of marital dissolution that has appeared in the literature is premarital cohabitation, beginning with reports by Booth and Johnson, 88, Bennett, Blanc, and Bloom, 88. Virtually all studies of the relationship between premarital cohabitation and divorce has found a positive link. This is interline premarital intercourse and divorce is limited, that this study found a relatively strong positive relationship between premarriage sex and divorce. The women, pre-marriage sex, 81% of these women had had premarital sex. 26% of those, or 26% of the sample, the first premarital sex was with their husband, and the other 55 was with some other man. So the age of first sex was 18. Anyway, it indicates that premarital cohabitation is associated with a 33% increase in the likelihood of marriage disruption at each point in the marriage. So Model 3 indicates a dichotomous variable relationship including premarital sex. So either you had it or you didn't. And indicates the women who had their first sexual encounter prior to first marriage are about 34% more likely to experience marital dissolution. The effect of having cohabitated twice is about 44% larger than the effect for having only cohabitated with her husband. So that's a pretty big percent, 44%. The effects for premarital sex in Model 2 indicate that it is only women whose first sex was with someone other than their husband who experience an increased risk for marital disruption, but it's 144% higher. So, disruption. This effect is the strongest for women who have had multiple premarital co-residential unions.
Living there.